Welcome everybody to this UFI Connects. My name is Hattendorf. I'm super excited to do a session of this series focusing on the US with a truly an all-star experts panel. Now UFI Connects is a series of talks, sessions, panels we do, or we cannot do what we normally do, bring the events industry together, the exhibitions industry together during the spring season for our regional conferences. COVID is keeping us apart, but there's a bigger need than ever to talk and to have this dialogue of exchanging views on what we are to do in this current time. Very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with UFI, as we are not that well known in North America, we are the global trade association servicing the exhibition industry. We represent more than 50,000 industry professionals and we have around 55, 56 national and international exhibition industry associations also in the network. As you see, the majority of members are organizers. There are organizers who also run venues, and there are the exhibition venues, the centers, who are also members. The 8% you see there are these exhibition industry associations from all around the world, and we have 8, 9, 10% of members from the service sector side, the partners of the industry, the service providers, the suppliers. We have a global footprint of members, and that's why we're doing these global sessions organized by our offices around the world. So for more information on UFI, feel free to go to our website, but I do not want to waste more time because we have a lot of ground to cover today in this session that is focusing on the state of our industry in the US, where we stand with the current situation, how the way out of the lockdown will be for the industry, and various different perspectives we can bring to the table for that. Some words of housekeeping before I hand you over to Marty. We will always run the sessions in the most interactive way possible. And this means that we want to make sure that you can ask questions. At the same time, we have muted you all, so you don't all ask your questions at the same time. So please, if you want to send a question, use the chat function of Zoom, type your question down there, we will call you up later and then activate your video and audio so you can ask your question to the panelists. Looking forward to what will be an exciting session, and let me introduce you to your host for today, Marty Glynn.
Thank you, Kai. Happy Cinco de Mayo, everybody. Just for all of you, as Kai gave you a little introduction there, for all of you who don't know UFI, they're doing an amazing job helping us get through this crisis with their information. Kai, you should be very proud of your team. They're doing really, really solid work. Before we start, I just want to thank Diane Bjorklund, Stephanie Selesnik, and Martha Donato for helping put this together. And what this is a byproduct of 6 weeks worth of an informal working group that we have put together that's been a cross-section of the industry, from CVBs to venues, hotels, show organizers, and vendors, both East Coast, West Coast, and Central. So we have a really good cross-section of perspectives, and I'll start off with a few things that have emerged over the course of the last 6 weeks, just to set the plate a little bit. We went from an exercise in cash flow management to a full-blown strategy review in very short order. I think in the initial phases, we thought this was going to be a cash crunch. How do you manage cash? And then ultimately, it turned, as the information changed week by week, it turned into a complete rethink of where we think the industry could be going. The most pressing piece of everything is around safety. Safety of the brand, safety of the attendee, safety of the exhibitor, safety of the staff, and ultimately the real need for empathy over opportunity. Because with crisis comes opportunity, but we also have to be sensitive to how people are viewing this through different prisms of thought, and they are uniquely different. We need to have kind of a hyper focus on policy and practices from an industry perspective before government mandates take over and potentially cause further disruption. Clearly, we need to be unified in that approach. The real need for a risk manager, internally or outsourced, and in the review of critical contracts, there's a great deal of variance in the interpretation of force majeure, especially when it comes to hotel attrition clauses and in the contracts. If you get a chance, look at David Audrain's Small Business Roundtable last week. They did an unbelievable job with legal, insurance, and HR. It was very informative, yet equally scary. On the technology front, the question is, will digital emerge as a solution or a disruptor? With the business models being down 30 to 50%, they need a rethink. There could be huge ripple effects throughout the industry. Will pop-up and regional shows be a short-term solution or a long-term strategy? With air travel in question and Berkshire Hathaway exiting their airline portfolio, what does that do and how it'll affect our shows? United Airlines this morning announced a 3,500 person layoff for the fall, which is concerning for sure. And equally with the fall expected to be 140% demand with 100% capacity, what will happen there? Who will be the winners and the losers? In that case, I just ask, please be mindful of all of our B-tier cities here in the US because they've taken really critical hits. Places like Detroit, Atlantic City, and Long Beach, they have a lot to offer when it comes to overspill of capacity. And then when all is said and done, will the investment community still find this industry as sexy as it has in the past? So with that, I am going to lead off with a man of wit and wisdom, who has a long distinguished career in trade development, ran one of the most successful show organizations in the history of the US, in my opinion, and is currently the CEO of the Javits Center, just built the first and largest temporary hospital in the US, and he's in the process of dismantling it now. And I'm going to hand it over to him because he just has a depth and breadth of the subject matter that is like no other. So with that, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you, Marty. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm going to try and give you an overview of what has transpired at Javits and use the history of what has happened to us as a means of thinking about the future. As I was thinking about what I would say to you, the one piece of advice that came to me most immediately was that the next time anything like this should be on the horizon, the first thing I would do is get a haircut, because there is nothing more necessary for me right now than a haircut. So please forgive my shaggy condition. The issue for us at Javits began in the middle of March. We had 2 shows that were due to take place at a time when there was much discussion about the future of the COVID virus. One of those, they were both due to open on the same day. One decided to go ahead and continue. One decided to close even though they were in the middle of construction at that time. And this followed a comment by Governor Cuomo, which suggested that there would be bans on large meetings at some point in the future. This caused some consternation, as you can imagine, and looking back, whilst it was a very hard decision for the organizers to cancel, it was an easier decision to stay open, but that easier decision to stay open may well have been another contributor in the extent of the coronavirus that we had in New York. So there is no right answer in this kind of environment. There is only the decision you make and the decision you stick with. We moved the event out, the one that took place, we moved it out at a weekend, and we began the next week to have discussions with the US Army Corps of Engineers, who came to visit us and ask about whether we had the capacity to be an emergency medical station. that was when we discovered that there was actually an opportunity for us as a convention center, because we were certainly at that time looking at no revenue from our events business for a considerable period of time. And the US Army Corps of Engineers was looking to have someone build a hospital for them and was willing to pay them for it. They were willing to pay the Javits Center. They were also willing to pay the employees of the Javits Center, the labor who would otherwise have been without employment. So we worked very hard with them to develop a 3-phase plan. Phase 1 was a 500 patient unit. Phase 2 was a 1,000 patient unit. And phase 3 was another 700 patient unit. Each of those patient units was capable of carrying 2 patients. So our total capacity, our total availability was potentially about 4,500 patients. Fortunately, we never got to that number, but that's a little later in the story. The thing I would say about our experience with the Army was that chaos and confusion was right there at the beginning, but it very quickly became a pretty smooth operation. I was amazed by how well the Army operated and how easy it was for us to become part of their operation once they accepted we had expertise in the business of constructing temporary structures. I think we were surprised to find that what they were really thinking about in the beginning was building something much more permanent that would take much longer. We were able to work with them and work with one of our contractors on phase 1, T3, to build the 500 units for patients in 3 days. We were actually available for patients to access the building about a week before the patients were ready to come to the building. So it taught me that what we can do in this kind of environment, whether it be this kind of disaster or whether it be something like a flood or a hurricane, convention centers can really fit into the needs at that time if there is some foreplanning and you have availability of equipment. So I hate to think of this, as Marty said, as opportunism, but I had to think about it at the time in terms of my revenue stream, because Javits does not receive tax support. We only receive revenues from the services that we sell. And as a state building, we were not in a position to charge rent to our own, to the state. So our business model was very impacted. We normally make our revenues by selling equipment for a short period of time and then selling it to another user for a short period of time. We ended up here selling all of our services to one user for a long period of time. And so our costs, which have remained as high as you would expect them to be for a 2 million square foot building in New York, our costs have not been met and are not being met by our current operations. The decision that was made to close the hospital came at a time when the surge had been identified as over and when the flattening program the governor had put into place was apparently being successful. However, the subsequent decision to that was to maintain 1,000 units of hospital, of patient care units at Javits in case of a second wave. That's put us in a difficult position now because we have business that is anticipating coming to Javits in September, October, November, and December. And we now have an uncertainty about what our availability will be for the rest of the year. That's a political impact. We are in discussion with the state about what that means, but it certainly will have an impact on our ability to come back into the economic activity that we would like to be. My short-term view on this is that Javits, because of where we are, because we were at the epicenter of this epidemic in New York, in the United States, that we will be impacted for a longer period of time than we would like. We will probably be impacted certainly through the late fall and maybe into the early winter. Our program for decontamination and sanitization, which is already underway, will be very effective, but we can't really begin it until our use as a medical station, even a mothballed medical station, is over. So we have a lot of uncertainty. Our exhibition organizers have a lot of uncertainty. And behind that, we have the uncertainty as to whether our financial model will survive this current crisis. The expectation amongst all of our customers, and we've talked to all of them, is that there will be a need for greater social distancing. Greater social distancing means moving from a model where we currently charge on the basis of net square foot use to perhaps charging on the basis of gross square foot use, because my revenue will be reduced by 50% if I have to expand to twice the size of available space in order to accommodate the same size of conventional meeting. So I think that there are many, many issues that the industry faces. I think that this kind of conversation is very helpful as we go through those phases. I don't think that we will end up with a standard practice across the world or even across the country. I think that there are going to be local regulations. I think that we all need to plan for a reopening, and we need to plan the kind of conditions we think we can reopen in. I don't want, as Marty said, to have anyone dictate to us what our conditions of operation should be. On the other hand, I think the conditions in New York City are probably different than the conditions are in, for instance, Arkansas, where there is a different level of concern and a different level of infection. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I don't know that I have any answers yet. My staff are at this point exhausted from all the work that they did over the past 2 months. We are beginning to focus much harder now on the future, but the future for all of us is still very unclear. So I think with that, I will leave it. And Marty, did I miss anything that you wanted me to say?
Alan, you know, we could go on and on with questions here, but this is really, I think, about the audience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move through this as quickly as possible and hopefully open up the question side to the constituents of UFI. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Next up is Marion Bossert from the Toy Association. She ran one of the last big events at Javits in February. Very familiar with the facility and the practices. Not only is Marion a visionary, but she's a key executor. She's absolutely fearless, and right now she's in the throes of launching a virtual event just after her live event. And I was hoping she could walk us through her thoughts and her strategy and execution and challenges and surprises. And Marion, let it go.
All right. Thank you very much, Marty, and greetings to everyone. And before I start, I just want to say that it was with a great sense of pride that we watched our friends at the Javits Center execute the way that they did. So I want to thank Alan and his team for that. It was quite an event. So first of all, for those of you we've not met, I'm with the Toy Association, and our members represent businesses that design, produce, license, and deliver toys and children's entertainment products to kids of all ages. So with that comes our two primary events. We execute Toy Fair New York, which we were very, very fortunate to complete this year. And we also operate a Toy Fair in Dallas. Toy Fair New York is our largest event. So now we're launching Toy Fair everywhere. So what does that mean and how do we get into it? 7 years ago, we decided that it was time on behalf of the toy industry to start development of a digital platform. We did it because we saw that the buyer journey for discovery was moving online. We were watching the age range of buyers coming to the show doubling every single year. And so we began working with Balloon to develop a digital marketplace. You'll find that I will avoid using the word virtual, although I know it applies in some regard, but what I'm finding is that when I say virtual trade show to people, they think that they're going to be playing, like going into a video game and going down the aisles and having some kind of a second world experience. But what we have developed over the 7 years and what we're building on now is a digital B2b platform. So what we started to do is that we looked at the fact that we had the reach to the industry, we had the resources, and so my pitch to my boss was that therefore don't we have the responsibility. Now, we've been marketing our digital platform for the last 5 years or so as Shop Toys 365. But in all candor, the industry was quite slow to adopt, and I now realize that we were providing a solution to a problem that no one told us they had. But that's okay. We stuck with it, and come this spring, we realized that the unfortunate time had come where now it was no longer, maybe we should consider a digital presence. We should actually offer a digital presence. So we said, well, our strongest brand is Toy Fair. So let's, instead of Toy Fair New York or Toy Fair Dallas, this is Toy Fair everywhere, because we are all in the same storm. We're not all in the same boat, but we are all in the same storm. So whether it's in the United States or it's around the globe, everyone has this pause in how they can have this business continuity. So we've taken pretty much the technology that existed in our 365 platform, but curated it a little bit differently to frame it up as a more integrated experience. So you may ask why we didn't just go with the 365. Well, there's a little bit of I think a psychology to that we realized that what was missing is that there were all of these shows that were canceled between after our show and through perhaps the end of the year. And those people who participate in trade events actually know that week I would have been doing that, or I would have been in that city at that show. So we said, instead of doing a month-long event, let's do a series of market weeks similar to what the apparel industry does. And that way, a company that sells product can actually adapt to their natural business cycle as they move forward. Because in our world, we may be selling fourth quarter in the current year in July and September, but come September, I might want to transition my conversation into more of a preview of what's coming in the next year. So this seems to have resonated. There's a comfort in saying, oh, I have to be ready for a certain week. And there also seems to be an embracing of the fact that they can transition based on available inventory or market focus at the time. So there's that. So what we have done in the 5 weeks since we got approval is to secure the domain, to design the user experience, and to start our conversations with all of our stakeholder groups. That we just started selling on Friday, and we had an immediate 3 people sign up, and we've got another 12 who wanted to migrate over from the 365 platform, and we're off and running. The main thing that we want to ensure is that if we say this is Toy Fair, then we want to make sure that we can somehow find a way for every stakeholder group to have some benefit from this, that everyone's business is interrupted here, so that our stakeholders might be inventors, it might be distributors, it's media. Everyone needs to sort of get a piece of this. And so that we are working through that right now to determine better what everyone needs and how we can turn the knob a little bit to make that work for them, because we feel responsible for the entire industry's business continuity.
Marion, real quick, I know early in the process when we spoke, you were talking that, informing and educating and repurposing that sales group was an initial challenge. Would you mind just tapping on that a little bit, and have you worked through the kinks?
Yeah, well, there are two challenges. One is our own internal education, and then the other is teaching our members that you are now in the live business, and you're needs to learn how to sell virtually. And that is not as easy as it sounds. There's a lot of trepidation. This is not a magic bullet, and educating them that you need as robust a platform page as you build and execute, that's building your success. But a major concern for us, and fortunately I have a great team, is to re-educate, saying we're now in the live event and we're now in the virtual event business. So we need to look closely at how we can tweak our own in-house talents to become the owners of this kind of an event as well. It's interesting and it's exciting, and it's nice to actually have something new for the team to sink their teeth into. But absolutely a learning curve, not just for our members, but for the internal staff as well.
And can you just touch on the marriage between the live event and what you're doing? Because like you said, everybody's interpretation of what a virtual event is really radically all over the board. And so are the opinions, right? So I'd be curious how you, how you balance that out and what you see it as a marriage of the future.
Well, I mean, it's not going away. I think we got their attention because of this summer, but I think we were right 7 years ago to say that this is a tool, a solution that if you are, if you're in the product industry as we are, that you absolutely can't have, you can't exist without a digital option as well. I would say, Marty, that the toughest thing, though, is that when I look at the show, I don't want to call it Toy Fair and only talk about people selling product and people with retail establishments. I do need to figure out a way, everyone is cross-pollinating, everyone is buying or selling something. So there are a lot of service providers out there. So how do you support the entire ecosystem of your business? So that is something that we are working on day and night to figure out how to provide that solution. I left Marty speechless. I left Marty speechless.
Sorry about that. There was a train going by. Commerce. Marion, thank you. Again, we could go on and on this subject, right? Because of again, back to the interpretations of the virtual and what's going to wind up happening. There's as many opinions as vendors out there trying to solicit a solution.
So the only thing our primary focus is all year long is that we exist to help more members sell more product in more markets more often. So that's what this has to do. It's not a video game. You're not stepping into a virtual world. You're stepping onto a platform that's going to help you move product in the way that you need it to move. And that's our focus.
Well, when you go back to basics, right, it's putting the buyer and seller together. That's the most, fundamental piece of the business. And right now with safety and the need for education and the need to marry new policy, how do you put the buyer and seller together safely, efficiently, and cost effectively? So I think that's what we're, even though there's as many questions as there are solutions, that's what we're trying to kind of work through and keep distilling week after week after week as new information comes in. How can we be ready for when the lights actually go on? Because if you're waiting for the light to go on, you're going to be behind drastically. And Marion, like you said, you've been on this for 5, 6, 7, 8 years doing your research. And finally, you came to that crescendo moment where you made a decision, right? So this is not really new to you. It's just new in its timing, right?
Yeah, it's been accelerated by the conditions. We had the technology there, and we finally had the demand the demand for it.
And I think that's what is going to wind up happening in the future, right? Is now that the demand is here. Always it's been, well, the technology is not quite up to snuff. Well, the technology wasn't up to snuff, nor was the need, and nor was the investment. And now that there's clearly a need, I think the money is going to come behind it, and then it's going to prove itself out over the long haul. And Enrico Gallinari spoke on the subject with UFI a few weeks ago, and his reference was, okay, it's maybe not today, but if you look at wearables, AR, VR, the data capture, that eventually that's going to merge down the road to create a digital solution that everybody be able to be prepared for. So, Marion, thank you so much. Yep,
You're welcome.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Next up is Rich Curran. He's the second generation general services contractor, very entrepreneurial minded. He took a very early action when this hit. Very empathetic leader. I know when we spoke, when he had to let his staff go, Rich was heartbroken and doing his best now to come up with solutions. And those solutions are wrapping themselves around what does new registration look like? What do floor plans look like? What's the downward effect on the business model? So Rich, with that said, if you could just walk us through your thoughts and what impacts you see and what advice you could give.
Definitely. Thank you, Marty, for the intro, and thank you, UFI, for having me. And hello to my friends around the world. I see some of you on the screen. So yeah, I wanted to, as Mary was talking about the digital platforms and how we're going to connect digitally, I want to go back to how are we going to get back to face-to-face and our physical meetings, and what are those structures going to look like once we are able to meet again, and some of the things that we need to put in place. And we all know that the structure of our events drastically changed now with the implementation of social distancing. So I wanted to kind of just run through some of the changes that we've been working on, and what registration is going to look like and what floor plans are going to look like and some of those impacts. So let's begin with registration. I mean, as we enter the spaces now, you know, the days of jamming in everybody side by side are over. So we really have to rethink our spaces, where our points of registration and how we'd go about doing that. And some of the things that we're seeing and coming up with and talking to registration companies is, I think, more of a model that looks similar to an airport self-check-in models, where everyone has individual lines that are spaced out, kiosks that you scan QR codes, that you, or your receipt with a SKU on it, everything in pre-reg, even the idea of if you attempt to do an on-site reg, you are unable to do it physically, but you can do it by an app, by the registration process. So we're going to drastically see that change, and also the physical layouts. We're going to see a lot of need for controlled queuing. We're seeing the tried and true practices in the grocery stores these days of the queue marks on the ground. So I know that we're going to need lots of directional signage on floor stickers, you know, as far as physical queuing spaces, making sure people are 6 feet apart. So these are just some of the things that we're going through, and a lot of it has to do with, obviously, the type of registration processes that shows have in place. So they cater each differently, but we're going to see a lot of the physical control and the spacing, and now going into like the reduction of what that looks like. The floor plan expectations, clearly we're going to have shrinkage on the need of social distancing within the floors. So we modeled out a few samples, and just to give some rough estimates, we took a floor plan with about 1,100 stands. We implemented wider aisles. We implemented some more booth separations, and it reduced down to around 700 booths. So we're looking at roughly 40% reduction in real estate. So this obviously plays into, you know, show organizers are selling real estate for booth space for revenue. So as we see that loss of real estate, now we're going to see, you know, substantial loss of revenue for all parties.
And real quick, that goes back to Alan's point, right, about the chart, the model changing, right? So when you look at the floor plan and how much net square footage you can actually capture versus what it means on a gross square footage, there's certainly going to be interesting conversations to be had. So sorry to interject there.
No, perfect. Actually, I was going to comment on that specifically. So also, since things are changing week by week, and the need and what we're for, what does social distancing and the size of the group gatherings and things like that, that's how we're gauging the floor plans and maxing them out, because obviously we all need to max out the most potential. So we're at that point where we're adjusting it as we go. We just saw, was it the Wuhan Auto Show launched last week, and it didn't seem like they had changed anything on their layout. So I guess we're kind of seeing the repercussions right now to see if there was any fallout from that as far as a resurgence due to that. So I think that as shows do model out and start to bring people in, then we're going to see, I mean, in a lack of a better sense, what we can get away with to the maximum safety levels. So with that, you know, again, all these new changes, we have to up our safety methods and implementations within the entry. So what are we looking at for barriers of entry? Are we looking at temperature checks? Are we looking at, you know, doing testing? And all these are going to have medical care providers to, you know, do these testing. So those are looking at new costs that are going to be directly to shows. And essentially all the show budgets, we're starting at ground zero again, developing from what the total revenue is for both sides, for vendors, for organizers, and now you're reducing the overall revenue potential and you're increasing the costs. So right now that's we're at that pivotal point where we're working through that, and what is our new outlook on the show going to look like as far as the cost and the revenues. So yeah, I mean, like I said, day by day we're changing and morphing with the need of the safety and how we can do it, and we're just trying to stay ahead of what is going to come down the pipe, because, you know, as we've all been saying, we don't want somebody to tell us how to do it. We want to suggest how it should be done. That's going to be to the most benefit to our industry, but also keeping our attendees and our exhibitors and our workers safe.
Well, we've had the good fortune of having, you know, really high level leadership like ASM Global, United Maintenance, organizations like that looking to establish what the protocols might look like, right? And they're speculative, right, at best. So people are putting documents together. We're going to try to review them and weave them down into what makes sense. But like you said, at the end of the day, Rich, the anticipation is 30 to 50% down on the floor. And in the US, that translates to a serious disruption in the drayage model. And then the drayage model, as it relates to how the floor actually looks and is monetized, is completely different. To the collective on our calls has been some pretty experienced registration people. And they've been walking us through both from a technological standpoint and how they see social distancing happening. And that starts out diffusing what's normally a centralized registration area. And is that actually possible? Because if you look at a lot of convention centers, there's an incredible amount of overlap as it relates to common space. So needless to say, there's a ton of things to work through. And I don't want to throw that drayage bomb at you, Rich. We'll leave that for another day.
Right. But that's definitely a reality, because like I said, it's the whole pie has been readjusted, as we like to say. So
thank you. So next up is Steve Walker. He's a leading sales executive for MGM in Las Vegas. Steve is responsible directly and indirectly for 11 properties. We have been looking at Las Vegas as kind of the canary in the coal mine because of how important they are to our industry and how aggressive theoretically they will be to get the doors open. I know they have started, having the discussion on leisure travel because, they're broken down into leisure travel, corporate events, and then trade shows. So with that said, Steve, could you, give us an update of where things are at in Vegas?
Sure. Thanks for having me, everybody. It's great to be here. I'll kind of jump right into it. Essentially, the long and short of it is Las Vegas is closed, currently closed, and our reopening date is to be determined. And I think before we kind of get into timelines and how that looks, I want to share some information just about Las Vegas in general, because I think it's important to kind of lay out the landscape and the scope of the city. And so what I'll do is I'll dive into some statistics here and kind of lay the groundwork for that. The city of Las Vegas proper overall has about 150,000 sleeping rooms. But I want to boil that down to just the resorts and the hotels on the Strip. And I'm talking about all the marquee, the iconic brands that we all know. The 11 MGM Resorts properties, all the Caesars properties, Wynn, Venetian, Treasure Island, Tropicana, Circus, the Westgate over near the Las Vegas Convention Center, and even the Stratosphere further up on the Strip. So if you take all those hotels on the Strip, that comes to about 80,000 room nights within a 2-mile period. Along with that, we have 3 major convention centers in town: the Las Vegas Convention Center, the Sands Expo Convention Center, and Mandalay Bay Convention Center, which falls under the MGM Resorts umbrella, for which I work. Also, within 1 square mile on the Las Vegas strips, there are 3 major arenas: the Mandalay Bay Event Center, the T-Mobile Arena, and the MGM Grand Garden Arena. And just a mile down the road, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas has its own Thomas and Mack Arena. So within that 1 square mile, There's 3 major arenas that total about 60,000 seats. And then there's a partnership between Las Vegas Sands and Madison Square Garden. They're currently building a Sphere on the north end of the Strip. So in reality, within these 2 miles, 2.5 miles, there's 5 major arenas. And then last but not least, we can't forget about the Allegiant Stadium that's currently being built. It's probably about 90% done. It's going to be the home of the Las Vegas Raiders, and it sits just across the highway from Mandalay Bay. And that's a 60,000 seat NFL arena that's supposed to open here in August. And you know, we're keeping our fingers crossed that sports is going to get up and running, and we're in fact going to have an NFL season. So just in a summary there, 80,000 room nights, 3 major convention centers, all of which are listed in the top 10 convention centers within the country, 5 arenas, and 1 stadium. Okay, and that kind of puts it all into a package there of what all goes on in 2.5 square miles up and down the Las Vegas Strip. So there's a lot going on there. This town was built for entertainment. It was built for conventions. And, you know, Marty, I'm going to ask you a question. What do all those components have in common right now?
They're all dead.
They're all closed. They're all closed. They're all dormant. They're all waiting for that day when we can open them up and invite our visitors back into town. And what that looks like, we're not quite sure. So let me, when we talk about visitation, I kind of want to just rewind for a bit and talk about what the statistics are for people coming into Las Vegas. And I got these statistics from the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority. And this is 2019 statistics. We had 42.5 million visitors come to town in 2019, which by the way, was a record visitation for us. Of that 42.5 million visitors, 15% or 6.6 million visitors were coming because of the group and convention segment. Now, when I heard that number, I thought, wow, that seems kind of low, right? I would have thought it would have been closer to 50%. But in fact, it's 6.6 million of 42 million people coming to Las Vegas for groups and conventions. Seems like a small number, but I can tell you from working on properties, that group and convention business is the foundation of what the hotels do, and it really drives the profitability of the hotels and drives the room rate and establishes the room rates for all the hotels up and down the Strip. And to kind of prove that point, if you ever listen to the earnings calls on whether it's MGM Resorts, or it's Wynn, or Las Vegas Sands, or even Caesars, the group and convention segment always gets time on those calls because that's how important it is. Okay, so that kind of gives you the landscape, you know, the monumental task of when we do open Vegas, what we have to do. Those hotels, those I think it's about 24 hotels that encompass that 80,000 room nights. Typically in 2019, 18, we run plus 90% occupancy, right? And so now all 80,000 of those rooms are sitting dormant. We're all going to open our doors at the same time. And then where are we going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks after that? So we just don't know what that looks like.
But right now, the leisure travel is already being started to be taking bookings. Is that correct?
So I kind of want to get into that timeline. Our last major convention in Las Vegas was Expo. We're very fortunate to host that event. It takes place every 3 years, and it comes to Vegas every 3 years. So those dates of Expo, ConAg was March 10th through 14th. We all know they ended the day early because of the COVID-19 virus. And 2 days later, on March 15th, both MGM Resorts and Wynn announced that we were going to close our doors on the evening of March 16th. So when I returned midnight, so that Monday, Tuesday. 2 days later, our governor came online or had a press conference and announced the closure of all non-essential businesses, including casinos, for the next 30 days. So that was March 17th. April 17th, 30 days later, came and went. He extended it to May 1st. May 1st came and went, and that current shutdown is through May 15th. And if we get through May 15th with a decline in the viruses, then we're going to enter phase 1, and we're going to reopen some of that non-essential business. Casinos are not included in that, but if we get towards the end of phase 1, 14 days later, the casinos could be part of that reopening in June. And if you're ever to go on our websites at MGM Resorts, you'll see that the first day that you can book a reservation is on June 1st. I think Wynn is from a Memorial Day weekend, but you know, it's constantly changing. I think we have 11 properties on the Las Vegas Strip. Are we going to open all of them all at once? Probably not. It'll probably be 2 or 3 at a time. That plan is still in the works, so I really can't get into it. But once the governor, right, says, hey, you guys can open for business, what's that going to look like? What's the gaming going to look like? What are the safety and the protocols going to look like? We haven't come out with our plan yet, but it is in the works. I know Wynn did a couple weeks ago. They came out with theirs. They're opening 1 property. We're looking at opening 11 in phases. So it's just, it's all going to be about the health and safety, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the consumer confidence that's going to get people to get on an airplane or to get in their car and come to Vegas. And it's going to start with the leisure travelers. I think everybody knows that. The group and convention segments that come in later as the confidence builds and as the regulations kind of are taken away from us.
Thank you, Steve. Listen, everybody knows it's about the safety piece, right? And we look at the big brands that you're attached to, that if hopefully you're able to take that leisure traveler in. I know you had mentioned the corporate business is very, very difficult right now. And, the trade piece is very anxious to get up and going. So with that, I'm going to segue to Randy Acker, because Randy is actually a client of Steve's. He had an event postponed in March. He's in the process of working that through with the anticipation of having his event in August in Las Vegas. So he's literally working through this whole process right now in real time. And to the collective's benefit, he's the publisher of Exhibitor Magazine. When we started getting on these calls a few weeks ago, his survey data was just unbelievable, really compelling, really useful. So I'm going to hand it over to Randy to just kind of start with the survey piece of what is coming out from the exhibitor community, and then how he's distilling that down for himself to use as an operator in real time. So with that said, Randy, there you go.
Yeah, we did unfortunately have to begin conversations with Steve about how does rescheduled postponed Exhibitor Live come back to life. But a little bit about who Exhibitor Magazine, Exhibitor Media Group, Exhibitor Live. We provide best practices for trade show and event marketers. We have since 1982. And so we've got tens of thousands of readers and viewers on our website and attendees at our show that are corporate marketers who utilize trade shows and events for their corporate sales and marketing strategies. So with that, we're talking about people that have an average of 42 shows a year. They do 16 events a year on the side. It's from all sizes, from small 10 by 10 exhibitors, from small companies of mom and pops, all the way to 98% of the Fortune 1000 are readers of Exhibitor Magazine across every industry sector you can imagine. So we've got an audience of people that are utilizing face-to-face marketing that we really want to understand how this COVID crisis is impacting them as a big component of what our economic output is, as we all know from some of our initiatives of telling Congress what face-to-face does. This shutdown is impacting exhibitors tremendously. One respondent back in some of our initial research came back and said, I have already lost 22 events in the last 8 weeks. That is already 80% of my annual sales leads. So you want to start talking about economic impact. How are we growing our business when we can come back if we've already started out losing 80% of our sales leads for 2020? The loss of the ability to launch new products continues to be heard over and over from our readers. Products that need a hands-on experience, products that need that demo, that need that quality check, that face-to-face can do that the other marketing channels can't do. Over and over, they're saying, our team has been working on this launch for years, and now it's been pulled out from under us. Many of them are trying to find, as Marion was talking about, how do we create some of these virtual alternatives? And they're trying to figure out how they do that. I'll give you a quote from one of the respondents. In our industry, virtual events are not beneficial at all because our audience won't attend other than to perhaps attend an educational session. But as a vendor who has had an exhibit space only with no speaking opportunity at this event, the virtual event is virtually worthless. You know, when you start to talk about subject matter experts and how they utilize their staff inside of their exhibits, what are we doing in a virtual platform that gives them that ability to tell that story? And virtual, they're saying, the corporate reader is saying, hey, I can't get out of it what I need to unless I'm a vetted speaker. Another goes on to say, our industry has done their homework prior to attending. The virtual isn't beneficial. They want to see the product themselves, what it looks like, how it operates, what the features and benefits might be. They want to check out the quality. That really is, again, why face-to-face will come back from this, because it can do that no other marketing channel can. I will tell you, though, however, that the majority of the respondents so far in our initial research come back and they say that they believe that hybrid is going to be a way of the future. Those of us who have survived the Great Recession know that back in 2010, we and every exhibitor exhibiting at shows were being bombarded with virtual alternatives. Well, that has come back full circle. 10 years ago, virtual was going to kill face-to-face. And yet we're having the same conversation 10 years later. But I want to go into a little bit about what the exhibitors are saying that they're concerned about in terms of going forward. Certainly, as Marty just pointed out, safety and security is a ginormous part of what everybody is thinking about. You can't not be thinking about that. They want to know who's providing the PPE if I come to the show. What are the risk management protocols? Who's going to be doing temperature checks? What's happening with contact tracing? The cleaning has many, many people concerned. Allen's Javits Center. What is going to happen with cleaning a venue that had all of these people that were sick with the COVID-19 virus? And so they want to know what's happening with those venues, but what's happening with venues in general as they're flowing people through them on a continuous cycle of new shows and new attendees from all over the region or the country, or as we all think, maybe international might take a while. They want to know what's happening with the things that they use that are rental items that they use in the shows that they're exhibiting in, things that have been out of their control, but have been brought in and are being rented by them just for that event. What's happening with those items? They want to know what is kind of the verification process, who is certifying that these cleanings have been done in a way that is safe for the attendee. And certainly as we're looking at what's happening, who's paying for it all. We've had multiple speakers on this panel talking about changes to the model and new expenses and changes in revenue. Well, what's going to happen to the exhibitor's cost structure? Is it going to be another hidden charge, quote unquote? Or is there going to be some transparency to say, we're all in this together. The rising tide raises all ships. Okay, but am I going to carry the burden as an exhibitor? You know, there's a lot of, certainly a lot of emotions about some of that already when Marty's comment about material handling and drayage. They really want to know about what's happening with the social distancing protocols. Richard and Alan have already talked a little bit about, well, what's happening to the changes to the show floor? Is this thing going to have any level of standardization? Remember I said in the beginning, they participate in an average of 42 shows. Well, they're going all over the country and all over the globe. Is there going to be some standardization? And Alan's comment earlier was, I think this is going to be more localized. Well, now I have to learn a whole new set of rules for all of these different places that I'm going to participate in an exhibit. And if my capital asset of my exhibit has to be different in different places, now my cost structure. What's going to happen with the social distancing, not only in the show, but in my own booth? There's a lot of experiences that are happening in people's exhibits, and now how are they going to have to shift those things? They want to understand that, what are the best practices, and we as an industry have to help them to do that. Certainly liabilities, risk management, Marty, you talked about this early on. We really need to understand where our risks are, where our liabilities are. How are they going to mitigate the liabilities for themselves, their staff, and their guests that participate in their exhibit? What's going to happen if someone's contact tracing leads back to their exhibit? They want to know what's going to happen with their liabilities. Do they have to increase their insurance coverage? What's that going to cost them? But one of the things that I think we've heard over and over that I think is outstanding is they're already worrying about the industry PR. How are we as an industry going to convince attendees that it's safe to come back to trade shows and conventions? How are we going to correct as an industry the public relations problem that by default associates us, because how can you even think about bringing a large gathering of people together? Well, that's a PR challenge that they're already saying, how are we as an industry going to overcome that? And then some of the veterans that have been around for a long time are already down the path of, we've got a lot of economic pain here. We've got budget cuts. We've got what we anticipate to be lower attendance numbers. And how are we going to get budget decision makers to say, it's appropriate for us to make this investment to get back into the economic climate of trade shows and events because they further business objectives? There's a lot of veterans that have done this. This is a career destination for many of our readers. This is not a marketing pathway somewhere. This is their destination. And they've been through downsizing. They've been through do more with less. They saw that the Great Recession downsized them dramatically. And guess what? Many of them never got back to a right-sized marketing department because many of their suppliers became outsourced solutions. We've got an audience at Exhibitor Media Group that we as a show organizer, we also have the supply side that feed the builder producers, the agencies, the flooring, the lighting. All of those folks are also constituents to Exhibitor Live, and they have oftentimes become extensions to the marketing department. And I think that one of the things that they're also worried about, back to the decision makers, is this concern about liability. 50% of our early respondents back on the research said that they want to jump back into face-to-face marketing, but their biggest concern is, will the decision makers lift corporate travel bans out of fear of liability of sending staff on the road?
So Randy, unfortunately, we're pressed for time here. As you may have noticed, Randy in our group is always bringing those light and fluffy subjects to the table. We could really go down a very deep rabbit hole. So we're going to turn this over as quickly as possible to Kai. I just want to close out what I've heard, and a lot has to do with rebalancing the ecosystem of the trade show community. A few thoughts on that is the organizer. Your vendors can be your greatest partner. Utilize them. For the vendors, please focus on the exhibitor experience. Make them feel special, safe, and important. Sometimes that's not always has happened in the past. And for the venue, we know that you're going to be under great strain, but ultimately you hold the whole thing together. No pressure there, Alan. I think it would be best to hand this over to Kai, because I'm sure there's a boatload of questions. So Kai, do you want to jump in here with the questions?
Sure, Marty, I'm happy to do that. And boy, I wish I would have a bigger screen, as we got so many questions, and that I'm pressed for space. That's the limits of virtual. Let me not waste time and try to get as many questions in as possible. Thanks to all of you for sharing so so insightful information. Jackie, you had a question to Marion. Let's start by looking at the virtual replacement, the digital side of things, before we zoom in onto the elements of restarting exhibitions and the venue needs for that. Jackie, if you see us and hear us, the screen is yours. I see Marty. Always good to see Marty, but Marty is not Jackie. If we don't have her, I can read out the question. Marion, it went to you. If we use the virtual exhibition instead of the live exhibition, will it have a negative impact on the live exhibition, especially in the recruitment of exhibitors?
Well, you know, visibility is quite poor right now, and we've decided to just pay attention to that which we can control right now and remain nimble. So we are strong believers that nothing will replace in the long term the need for human interaction. It's just important. Regardless of the industry that you represent, it's a community that you serve. So it will be back. But right now, as a trade association, we have the luxury of being hyper-focused on making sure that we are supporting business continuity today, fourth quarter this year. And we'll see how that goes. But I think that not participating in our future events will come down to what someone said before, that consumer confidence in the safety of participating in events. I think they have confidence in our organization, but then we have to interpret an awful lot of information to say, what are the practices that we must do and what are the practices that we want to do? But I think it's an and, not an or, to the exhibition business.
No, thank you. And we're kind of in the same boat here. I mean, this very session, being a virtual session, is kind of our way as an association to serve the industry we work for, to make sure we can make the best out of the current situation. So let's move on to the thinking of the visitor. And we had kind of a number of questions around social distancing and the impact it will have on the physical events once the events restart. And there was one question, if we see social distancing becoming a new norm. And Simon Nordy, you had a question that is also regarded directly to the physical visitor experience as we go back to see and attend shows and events. Simon.
Yes, thank you very much for giving me the chance, and thank you for speaking today, guys. My question really is, do we really think that our clients, especially our visitors, will be willing to queue to attend an event in the same way they queue for food at the moment? I think it will have to be a seriously must-attend event for them to put up with that. I'd just be interested to know what your views are.
Well, who wants to take that?
Marty, I'll jump in real quick and then you follow up. One of the things I think is it's the challenge of the organizer and the contractor and the registration companies to come up with the solution on how to expedite that process with the new norm. And again, the more that can be pushed to pre-registration, the more that can be pushed to having everything done when you arrive will expedite the process of going in, because the queuing won't be as necessary if everybody's already registered. So Marty, you want to add to that?
I mean, what we're noodling around with, do we split it into sessions, AM and PM sessions, and that it's not a general registration, so that there's a little bit better crowd control and efficiency, right? Like you said, unless there's a compelling reason to go to the event, when you're thinking about having to fly and what the question marks around flying are, you're going to have to make sure that the experience is worth the effort and the time and the money, right? One of the things that's been greatly discussed is with smaller shows is the focus on the attendee to be towards an influencer, so that you have, that kind of always that mantra, quality over quantity, right? So to weed out the tire kickers and make sure that the attendee that's coming has really been vetted as best as possible, because I don't think, the way it appears right now, that the numbers game is in our favor, right? Having gone through 9/11, Superstorm Sandy, the economic impact, the Javits came out as being a driver of the whole economy. And at that point, it was volume. Right now, volume doesn't seem to be the winner, right? It's management of numbers. So that's kind of the great unknown. And all throughout this 6 weeks of conversation is the attendee. You know, you can model out, as Randy said, the exhibitors want to get back in conversations. The exhibitors, this is where their sales platform is, but nobody has an answer on what the attendee experience is going to be from a volume, and how is it going to be managed. The registration people who are not on this call, and we have to cull this down, are definitely uniquely aligned in thinking about the marriage of technology, mobile, and safety. So I'm confident in kind of that the leadership of the bigger associations are thinking that through. We just weren't able to present that today. Apologies. We were just trying to give you as broad a stroke as we could here to walk away and think on your own.
So, Marty, just to jump in on the broad stroke question, something I think that's very evident from what's been said here today is that there are many, many, many more questions than there are answers. In fact, right now, there are very few answers to the questions that we all have. But I think it's important to realize that what we are looking at today is not what we're going to be looking at in 3 months' time or 6 months' time or 9 months' time. The expectations for standards in terms of social distancing are likely to change as time goes on. You only need to look at what has happened when some parts of the world have begun to open up again to see that social distancing, whilst a goal, is not necessarily achieved by everyone or indeed wanted by everyone. So I think we're talking about something that's very, very difficult here, because today we're talking about organizing an event. An event you're talking about organizing today will not take place for another 6, 9 months, 12 months perhaps. The circumstances in 6, 9 or 12 months are going to be very different. So it's really an issue for the industry, but it's really an issue for the world. Because as I look at social distancing at Javits, for instance, I think about social distancing in Grand Central Station. How are we going to social distance in various commuting experiences? These are big, big questions that I don't think we as an industry can necessarily solve ourselves. We're going to be part of a larger activity that becomes essentially the consumer deciding that they're more comfortable with doing these things. And at that point, the industry will begin to roll back.
Thank you.
Very good points there. And just to add to that social distancing experience, the IKEA stores opened again in Germany, and we went to buy a wardrobe for our daughter. Let's say the social distancing experience I had standing in line outside of an IKEA for an hour, it's nothing I need again anytime soon, because it wasn't neither social nor distancing. Next question goes to the UK, Simon Foster.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi guys, nice to see you all. Alan, I think your hair looks fine. Trust me, it's all good.
Yours too.
It's really great. Having been on lots of calls of this all over the world for the last few weeks, it's really great to see the optimism here. I hope your optimism is right, because the dates you guys are talking about for opening up and starting up are a lot earlier than we're hearing elsewhere in the world. So I really hope you're right, and that's a forebear for the rest of the world. As always happens when you ask a question early on, I think between Richard and Alan in particular, a lot of the questions I asked were answered. But I was just really suggesting, Alan, if you could just open up a little bit more about that idea you said about charging for gross space as opposed to net space, which my assumption was, as Richard had talked about, was down to the needing extra space for spreading booths out, wider aisles, registration, and what have you. And then linked with that, just because I can ask 2 questions, was I'd heard, which I can't lie, was something of great pleasure to me, that this might signal the death of pipe and drink, on the basis that it offers less protection to people between booths than does fixed walls. And I realize fixed walls are more expensive, but by the same token, if they allow you to put booths closer together, maybe that's a quid pro quo.
So I'm with you on the pipe and drape. The death of pipe and drape has long been forecast and is yet to come, but this could well be a step in that direction, because I think social distancing and booth design will all be affected by what we're doing. When I referenced the model on net square footage and gross square footage, what I'm saying is we are, as an industry and individual customers, are going to have to make decisions based upon what we think the economic model can be. I presume that no one wants to increase their cost by 100% simply because they have to take more space. On the other hand, if you have more space, there are more costs incurred. So how do we kind of balance that? I don't have an answer yet. We are trying to have that conversation with individual customers, but they're also having that conversation with their customers to say, if you're going to have an event that is occupying twice as much space, but having half as many customers allowed, then what's the economic model for you? So many things that haven't yet been worked through. You know, I'm actually, you know, in terms of reopening, I think there's a lot of early opening being talked about. I'm kind of in favor of a little longer period of time to let things wash through. I think that we need more time to come up with an answer. I know that's not necessarily what event organizers want me to say, but I actually believe that the event venues will be ready for business before the event organizers are ready for business, because they have so many more questions to ask with their customers. So, you know, the essential thing that we have to do is more of this kind of conversation, more communication between us about what our problems are, and then an acceptance that we are in this together, and that if we want the industry to survive, we need to collaboratively come up with solutions to all of these problems. I just don't have the solutions at my fingertips now.
Simon, that goes into the whole business model piece of it, right? Because obviously people are burning through cash. And when you have a cash burn like that, there's going to be winners and losers. So I would be naive to think to some degree there's not going to be consolidation, bankruptcies, stripped down portfolios, because for every non-answer of this, there's a burn rate of cash, and there's going to have to be some solution at some point. You can't just completely turn off the lights and say, well, I'll wait till they come on. So that balance and that kind of recalibration is a rethink of all of the business models and how the interconnectivity is currently, and how is it going to be pulled apart and put back together again. And the people who are open-minded to that and servicing the industry are going to be the winners. The ones who are focused on bottom line, they're going to have I think, a struggle. So, you know, that's kind of a harsh analysis, but that's what I think is the reality of where we're at.
I would agree with you, Mike. You know, talk about harsh reality. We're in a harsh reality, whether we like it or not. So the world, it's a very tough place where we are. Alan, I think your answer, I think both the answers were right. If you'd have had a clear answer, then I would have said you're even bigger geniuses than I know you both are, because nobody knows where we're going at the moment. But I think, Alan, that's an interesting point about organizers having to wait, because I think the question is everybody's desperate to get back out on the show floor and do things from an organizing perspective. But as we've asked several times here, it's whether visitors, exhibitors, and others are willing to do that. And then
yeah, I think the fear, I'm sorry, Simon, but I think the fear is, from my perspective, and this is kind of from my event management background, if I want to have an event, I want to have it be a successful event. And if that means I have to wait another 3 months, then maybe I'm better off waiting 3 months than I am pushing something now that may damage the brand beyond a point where I can restore it in the future. So, you know, again, not easy answers to these questions, but I think you have to look at timing and say, what happens if I do it as soon as I can, as opposed to what happens do I do it when my customers are ready to do it, even if they want to do it now. And you know, we can talk about that from other perspectives, from the exhibitor perspective. But I think there's a lot of caution out there right now from our customers, and I think we may have to just wait until they're a little less cautious.
Simon, can I just counter that real quick? Because the other piece of that is the people who are looking to do micro regional pop-up events, they're not going to wait for the bigger show organizer to protect a brand. They're going to look to put a buyer and seller together very, very quickly. And they may be the first ones to combine virtual and combine a customized experience. You know, my conversations within our group has been, I call it, this could be the rise of the agency model, where the agency really becomes, they understand brand experience. They understand how to make a niche event very quickly. So while bigger organizations are learning how to, you know, recalibrate themselves, I wouldn't be surprised if you see kind of pop-up micro regional events that are going to look to hit quick and see if they can make some action. Just to
agree with you. 100%.
Oh, I hate to interrupt you guys. I'm cautious of time. Alan, you answered kind of 2 or 3 questions that were lined up on the go. I like when will venues be ready to reopen? You said they will probably be likely ready to be open before the organizer ready to run shows? And is there a best point to run a show, the first chance to run a show, or the best slot a little later? A lot of conversation and discussion has been going on in the chat. I want to bring up a very last, very operational question, because I promised to still bring it up. Jason Pop, you will have the last question of the day, and make it a short one, please.
No problem. Thanks, Kai, and great job to the panelists. It was very interesting. It is a tactical question, and it's around the business model. And we know that density is going to be impacted. I think several of the panelists mentioned that. How about move-in days and move-out days? I mean, those of us in the industry know those are some of the most chaotic times when venue staff and general contractors, exhibitors, registration companies, EACs are all coming together to build a show. Do you envisage longer build-in times and build-out times? And how will that impact the fact that you've got so many people looking for space, in particular in the autumn time?
I think in the short term, all of the events that we would expect to come to our center will be smaller than they originally intended to be. So I think that may address some of the social distancing questions. It may also address some of the length of move-in, move-out time, because there will, I assume, be less to move in and less to move out. I think that there are going to be a number of things for us to be challenged with move-in. Are we doing temperature testing of our employees? Not necessarily temperature testing of attendees, but of those who are building the booths, those who are coming in to build the booths, because the interaction in those timeframes is so much greater. I think there is, again, no single answer to this. If there is time available so we can move in more slowly, we will make it available. And I think in the beginning of this process, we will very much try to do that. In 12 months' time, I'm not sure we'll be having to face the same questions. I think some of it will resolve itself. So I would like to see the industry start slowly, roll out what is achievable, and show some wins. I think we need to be able to go back to the world of our customers and show them it is possible to do what they want, and that is to have an event that's safe in a venue that allows them to be socially distant, but still allows them to have the kind of interaction with their customers that means they can sell product.
Hey, Marty, I'll kind of jump in on that too for the move in and the move out. I think, you know, working at Mandalay Bay, it's a little bit different model than a standalone convention center, because our main focus is to fill those sleeping rooms throughout, you know, midweek. So if we are to extend move-in time or move-out time, it could affect the week on either side of that particular week. So it could affect our strategy. And this is in normal times. Now I think we're just kind of keeping our fingers crossed and hoping that events happen and that people show up and the events are somewhat successful. But I think under normal circumstances, there's a true strategy in a building like Mandalay Bay, even the Sands Venetian, as to the sales team's responsible for filling group business Monday through Thursday, and a move-in day, an extra move-in day on the week prior can kind of kill that strategy. So in the short term, I think, you know, all bets are off. We got to figure out what that looks like and just get events to move in and happen. But in the long term, as things get more back to normal, I think those questions are going to be asked of current clients. Hey, can you spare a move-in day here? Can you spare a move-out day here? To kind of crunch the model, crunch the week. So that's
okay. So I can feel the big hook of Kai saying, "We're at the end, everybody." So remember, eye contact. That's it. Kai, did I put the hook out quick enough?
You read my chat. You read my chat message.
Outstanding, outstanding, everyone.
Wonderful, amazing job, anybody. Thank you very much. The last word of the panel goes to the organizer, Marian. Any last thoughts?
No, I would just say, like, take one day at a time. As I said before, the visibility is very poor right now. So let's take one day at a time, because that's how quickly things will change. But I thank you for this opportunity. I'm sure I'd love to hear all the other questions if that could be shared after. I think there's a lot to think about.
One last thing, it would be remiss to not thank Freeman for Go Live, putting that together, and GES, CISO, ASM Global, individuals like Ken McAvoy who've been, you know, just working day and night to try to help us out as a collective. It would be just not smart to recognize everybody's, you know, resources and their efforts they put to help everybody. Thanks, Kai.
Thanks, Marty. And we are indeed all in this together, and Go Live Together is doing a very wonderful job aggregating a lot of activity in the US for the push towards legislation that helps us as an industry to get through this. Pascal, you wanted to share some slides for what's coming up next regarding UFI Connects. First of all, yes, we will share the questions that were asked today with the panelists. Nicole, sorry I didn't call you up, but you said your hair isn't up to it. So we'll pass on the question so you get your answer. And yes, Paul, I saw your question too, and we'll make sure you get an answer for that. It is essentially about sharing the floor plan drafts you've been working on, and I'm sure Rich will follow up on that. Thanks everyone for the session. Next UFI Connects, next Monday. As there has been a lot of talk in Europe about UVC purification. Brussels Expo will go all in on that and essentially install air purifiers working on ultraviolet light all across the venue, which is used in medical installations around the world. Their announcement had sparked so much interest that we said, let's do a session about it as a best practice case, or as a case to see if it actually is a best practice case. That will be up next week, Monday. Pascal, you promised me another one for next week, Tuesday. If you're interested in what's happening in Asia, we have a panel on that on Tuesday. This will be in the middle of the night on the East Coast, so it's more geared towards Asia. The role of governments in the recovery, we will talk support programs. We will talk funding issues and funding support and government programs to see our sector through this patch. As always, in closing, thank you to UFI's diamond sponsors. Freeman already got a shout out from Marty, so they get another shout out from me. Shenzhen World, Qatar Tourism Council, and TCEP. And thank you all for your time. That has been UFI Connect for now. The session will be available on demand as soon as we can upload it. And I'm sure we will follow up on many of these questions in other sessions. From Germany to America, goodbye.